Whoa, crazy stuff.
Kinda like it though.
What is this?
Duh, just a sad monkey.
It's an ape.
Not sad, bored.
Okay, whatever.
Whatever. Watch out!
Okay, a bit too much.
Whoa, 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 whoa!
Huh?
A portal? I dig it!
Oh my god.
Wow! Woo!
Woo! Ouch!
Good shit, nephew.
No way! Paris Hilton!
Oh, they let children in here.
Yeah, it's a birthday, can't you see?
Makes total sense.
You don't get it, do ya?
Who cares? Let's go!
Hi everyone. I'm so excited and so honored to be here in Rio today to introduce you the Sandbox. Today, I really want to show you all the possibility and all the creative possibilities that everyone will be able to do with the metaverse. Not only the brand, but every users that will be able to build anything, create anything, and be part of it. But first, let's talk about the unbelievable moment that we are living right now. It's the first time in the history that 50% of the global youth population are digital native and were born with internet. It means we will need to understand how this moment changed the way they are using digital product. As you can see, they are spending already more than 12 hours a day, 12 hours a week, sorry, on virtual worlds. Gaming is already bigger than music and movie combined. So this is already happening. It's not a trend, it's not hype. We know virtual worlds is already changing completely the way people are using internet. Then, what's also very different that 20 years ago, 15 years ago were happening is that 75% wants to be creators. People doesn't want only to play, but they want to create. And what is fantastic is the technology, the blockchain technology, enabled them last year to be able to truly own and to truly trade in a scarcity way digital items. So like now we know that people are able to spend, as they are doing in real life, spending money for Gucci sneakers, they want to do it in digital wearable. So our mission in Sandbox is to empower the creator communities, enable them to create a new format of entertainment, a new format of experiences through digital ownership. So let's try to define what is the metaverse. I know many of you may wonder what it is. But first, how many of you already create an avatar in any platform or gaming? Okay. So today I hope after my presentation I will convince you to create an avatar in Sandbox. So what's the metaverse? The metaverse, think it as a myriad of virtual worlds that will be able to connect to each other and be interoperable and enable people to create and play experiences more immersive, more social, more fun. But first, it will be empty. And I know this is complicated to understand this, but we will need you to create the metaverse. So like the way the Sandbox has been created, it's to be 99% user-generated content, where our user base will create and own every aspect of the virtual world. Second, what we believe is like we wanted to bring brands, we wanted to bring fashion brand, architecture brand, music IPs, characters to the metaverse to bridge the gap between something that looks like completely new, but feel players comfortable and move to something that was only gaming to something that is larger than this. The blockchain technology enable also a new way to play virtual worlds. So everything, your digital identity, the items you will own, everything will be stored in the blockchain and completely owned by you. about the cryptocurrency and about the Sand, which is the token that govern and enable players to use the Sandbox. This opens also a new way to create the economy of the game. Using cryptocurrency as the economy for the games enable new jobs, enable players to decide the future of the game, and enable a new way of trading and interoperability. We have already 400 brands that join the Sandbox in gaming, in entertainment, in music. So we have Tony Hawk, Steve Aoki, Snoop Dogg, Adidas, HSBC, and many brands coming from all over the world. We have over 40 countries that already joined the Sandbox and apply what we call like global brands and local brands. So when you navigate the Sandbox, you can have like brands that have a very strong culture in each part of the world. As you can see here, we really want to not to focus only in US or in Europe, but be sure that when you go into the virtual world, you feel culture from all over the world. What we build, and it's very unique, we build a virtual world with a limited numbers of lands. Think a land like a digital real estate, a piece of property that you can really own and buy, and where will you be able to build. Every land can be crossed to one to another, can be open, can be gated, can be monetized, and enable all your friends to access it, but you can also be neighbors of Warner Music, be neighbors of Time, be the neighbor of Snoop Dogg, be the neighbor of Paris Hilton. So like we really recreate the same value system of real estate that you have in real life. What you can do on your land, you can not only create games, you can also make your wedding, create a dance club, do a concert, decorate your land as you will decorate your house, create some tourism, museum, galleries, fashion experiences. All those kind of experiences show that the metaverse is something different than just gaming. What we want is to make creation possible for everybody. So we created tools that doesn't need anyone to know how to code. So those non-coding tools make this product possible and make anyone able to create. We will need everyone to be able very easily to create something personal, something fun, something that will enable people to be rewarded, to be engaged, and all this will be available on their lands. What we believe is like in the next few years, you will see a new kind of jobs on the metaverse. What kind of job? You will see community builders, obviously architects, fashion designers, any kind of collectors that will be able to create furnitures or fashion brands, any new kind of IP that have already been created in the last couple of months, like Bored Apes or World of Women. You will see hosts that will help people to navigate into the metaverse and help them to choose the best experiences, the best music experience, and help them to travel the metaverse. And you will see, of course, the people that invest at the beginning and invest over time, buying land, buying sand, and be able to rent their land and make the business grow, being part of it at the very beginning. What we've been able to achieve the last 2 years with the Sandbox is to build a platform where everyone and every companies can develop a new kind of experiences. That's why we've been able to move from 10 studios developing on Sandbox to now over 220 studios all over the world that define themselves as metaverse agencies. Now let's talk about how, and that's why I asked you before, how you will be able to enter the metaverse. It's going to be very simple. You need to create an avatar. So in the same way that 20 years ago you needed to create an email, here you will need to create a digital version of yourself. This version of yourself will be unique, it will be in 3D, you will be able to customize it. But what makes all this very special is that all those avatars will be NFT and unique. So for example, there will be only one Snoop Dogg in Gucci that will represent you in the same way that other fashion items will be unique and represent you in real life. Another specificity about the Web3 metaverse is like it will be interoperable. It means like anything you will buy in Web3 communities, any NFTs that you will buy outside Sandbox will be also playable inside Sandbox. So we'll be able to create a new rendering of other digital assets that you've been buying before. Now let me give you some quick advice about how to create an experience for Web3 community, for Web3 people. So the first thing is like Web3, because it brings scarcity and interoperability, it looks like it's going to be very attractive to make money. But you should not think like this and put first your creativity. Like the best way to build a new kind of fan that's going to be much more engaged than any other fan that you and any other community you've seen before, it's to first give them value and give them a roadmap of what you will be able to do with the NFTs that you will drop for them. So giving them reward, explaining them like how you embrace NFT culture, and also make them create around your brand and around what you want to do. So what we did with all those brands is develop what we call Game Jam, where all those brands were able to not only publish experiences in Sandbox, but offer to their community to create experiences around them. I'm gonna show you different examples. So here is a Gucci. It was launched last year. Gucci wanted to build Web3 experiences. They did it in a different virtual world. This is the one they did in Sandbox, where they show a treasure hunt. They were able to enable an exclusive NFT at the end of the experience. It was matched with other real-life experience they did all over the world in an activation called Gucci Vault. The other example is Paris Hilton. So Paris Hilton is one of the biggest influencers in the world, and she used to create activations that last 20 seconds, 5 seconds, 1 second, which is basically TikTok, Instagram. With the metaverse, influencers are able to create something much more engaging, where the audience basically get in their world and can spend an average of 25 to 35 minutes exploring a 3D world, completing quests, meeting people. So this is the experience she did for Valentine's Day, where like we got over 55,000 players interacting with each other around Valentine's Day.
Celebrate Valentine's Day.
Another example was a very famous IP in gaming, because gaming is also shifting from Web 2 gaming to Web 3 gaming to Web 2 blockchain gaming. So this is a Ubisoft brands called Rabbids. We don't hear the sound here, but it's quite funny, like how everyone were able to acquire a limited number of rabbits on the blockchain as NFT and be able to play this new world and this new kind of gaming station with rabbits for the Chinese New Year's Eve. Another example is how music will be available in the metaverse. Like how music, since the pandemics, is seeing a new opportunity to create virtual concert and virtual entertainment. So one of the biggest landowners in Sandbox is Warner Music, and they enable like dance club, DJs performing, and not only enabling like a passive entertainment, but an active entertainment where user can decide what's going to be the next songs. They can collect, survey, and they can spend 30 minutes to meet each other with their avatar on a virtual club. So again, our goal here is to build a platform. So we give an opportunity for all web agencies, advertising agencies, design agencies to move in the metaverse, create a new kind of experiences for brands or for themselves, create new IPs in a different way. 2023 has been an amazing year. We are now reaching over 200 agency partners, over 100 game maker studios, tens of platform and tech partners are joining Sandbox and the metaverse. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Ya, and everybody for being here with us today on the third day of Web Summit Rio. I want to start us off by giving just a little bit more context about why we're sitting down here to talk about building for utility with Yacht and not any other crypto founder. Yacht, Animoca Brands was not a crypto company to begin with. You were a gaming company, but now your brand is known throughout the industry. And if you are not known by a crypto company, you should be known. And that's because last year you were the most active acquirer of crypto companies, and you're also the second most active investor in crypto businesses so far in your lifetime, in your company's lifetime, I should say. You've invested in a total of over 400 businesses. And that's not usual anywhere, because if you think, and you look back on a company, for example, like Stripe, they've only invested in, say, about 90 in their existence, Facebook around over 100 about. So let's start there as we're talking about building in this moment. Why are you making so many bets?
So for us, Web3 really is a natural iteration of the future of the internet. The reason why is because it's for the first time that we can actually have true digital property rights, meaning we have the ability to actually own our digital assets. This is very, very relevant today because when you think about what happened with Web 1, that was the web of read. So we were all able to sort of access information. Information was democratized. But in Web 2, which is the social web, which is what we see with Facebook and Instagram and the like, we're now able to write to the web. So we're able to contribute our own time and attention and recreate data. And data has become that incredibly valuable resource, which is the fuel for things like the AI we're speaking about, for instance. And without data, you wouldn't have ChatGPT, you wouldn't have self-driving cars, you wouldn't have all this innovation that you're seeing in the tech space. So data is the most valuable resource in the world today. But the problem is, up until blockchain in Web3, you weren't able to own that data. You weren't able to have sovereignty over your data. As a result, you become basically like a digital serf. All of us here today, if we're using Facebook, for instance, we are dependent on the platform. If you're launching an app on Apple, it's not your choice to be on Apple. It's Apple's choice to be whether you're allowed to be there. Right? In a country, if someone was to deplatform you, you have rights. You have a judiciary. But in the platform, it's simply push of the button and you're deleted. And so our digital existence is basically one where we become slaves effectively to the platforms. And Web3 is the antidote to that. And things like non-fungible tokens provide a way in which we can truly have our representation of digital property rights. Now, this market, just in closing on this one, is particularly relevant because there's a correlation between the physical world where property rights, if you have strong property rights, then you have capital formation, you have better economies. So countries like US or European countries have very strong foundations of strong economic activity because they own stuff. But in places where you don't have property rights, which many places in this part of the world have, for instance, or unstable property rights, the GDP is low, they're poorer, there's no innovation, there's lack of entrepreneurship. So you take that same parallel from the physical world into the digital, and that's what the open metaverse, Web3, and blockchain is all about. And that's why we think it's the revolution that it is, as it empowers basically a new generation of people in this more democratic capitalist framework.
Right. Effectively, we've all been, your thinking is, and I think this is thinking that most of us in this community are familiar with the idea that we've all tacitly given a little too much of our data as payment, as a very high payment for the services on the big platforms. And you actually have talked quite a lot, and you've been pretty open about saying things like, well, I should say, you do not think that the metaverse that Mark Zuckerberg is correct.
Correct. And I also think that the metaverse idea, the way that he's building it, is not going to succeed because it's a centralized platform. And so he has to build up all the infrastructure and maintain that, which is why he has to charge 47% in order to make it sustainable. So to us, VR and AR are interfaces into the metaverse, but they're not the metaverse in itself. The metaverse is the place where we have to have ownership, where we have to have our own sovereignty over it. If we don't have our identity on it that belongs to us, then what's the point? Right? That's basically, literally being a serf on sort of the lands of feudal lords. But I want to just give you one example. Last year, for instance, in the open metaverse, not the Facebook metaverse.
The open metaverse that you're creating.
Yes, which is Web3, blockchain, that kind of stuff. Total economic activity was $30 billion. Now, just put that in context. That's that's higher than the GDP of Cyprus, Iceland, and 100 other countries. So it's already not doing too badly. The second point is that in those sort of virtual, let's call it metaverses and country states, as we like to sometimes put them, there's DAOs, these decentralized autonomous organizations. They have $12 billion of funds right now. These DAOs can be used by the community. They're owned by the community. They're not owned by a central organization. Right? So if you're looking for funding, for instance, you don't have to necessarily go to a VC. You can go to a DAO, for instance, right? Mm-hmm. That capital exists there. It's liquid, and it's basically there to build out these ecosystems. The amount of funding, for instance, the DAO's combined reserves, which is $12 billion plus, is actually just slightly below that of the fiscal reserves of New Zealand as an entire country. Right? So you kind of see where this is going. There's a whole, let's call it parallel economy that's based on a very capitalist framework that if you're not in it, you're kind of missing out on it a little bit like, I would say, the parallel of China. Right? When China was emerging 30 years ago, if you're outside of China, you don't understand it. It seems a mystery. But when you're in China, you're like, oh, hold a second. It's growing really fast. I understand the opportunities and the risks, of course, as well.
Right. So I'm going to push back a little on this part because I do think, well, let me ask the audience first, how many of you currently play, or how many of you own a cryptocurrency? Question 2, how many of you have played a crypto game? A few, significantly lesser, I would say.
Sure.
So that's the basis of this question,
yes.
Right? And I think one that you've heard before. Clearly, there's a lot of growth here. Some of it is hype. We've seen some people go into NFTs and into the metaverse, the open metaverse, and say it's exciting, so fun, and then they leave, right? Why is it, and what needs to be done for the metaverse, the open metaverse, to be convenient enough that everyone here says, I want to be there?
So maybe some data points first, right? And this is to us as to the motivation. Last year, NFTs alone, so not cryptocurrencies, just NFTs alone, sold $24 billion worth of NFTs. 90% of that value went to creators and owners of these NFTs. Spotify, which is the largest Web2, I guess, creator system out there, only paid $7 billion to its creators last year.
And we should also mention that the majority went to the 1%.
Exactly, right? Exactly, because it's mostly the publishers and whatever. Musicians cannot make a living on Spotify. But artists, for instance, or game developers can make a sustainable business with Web3 selling NFTs in that community setup. So from a sort of economic business modeling standpoint, NFTs and Web3 offer a very clear advantage because you have capital formation. But of course, that's something that's invisible to a lot of people. So how do we onboard people to understand that that's potential? Because at the end of the day, it's not just about money. It's about ownership and the things you want to do that belong to you. Like in the physical world, for instance, we buy things because we care about them, because we want the memories attached to them. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we want to sell them right away. Mm-hmm. That's, like you wouldn't sell your wedding ring, for instance, right? Or you wouldn't sell personal artifacts that mean something to you. But what happened in the crypto world, particularly when Web3 became as big as it was, remember the origin of crypto was financial in nature. Bitcoin was essentially an answer to a financial problem that existed in the world, basically with the financial crisis back in 2008. And it emerged in 2009 as sort of a revolt against that. So it had a very strong financial nature. So for a long time, sort of the Web3 world was maintained by what we describe as crypto Wall Street. Right? Imagine if the entire economy was run by Wall Street, you'd have a very different dynamic. Because most of the people were from that. And so all the criticisms that people have and the people who are trading, which are important to the market, but if they're 90% of the market, create the problems that we've seen before, especially last year was very, very evident. But NFTs have done something else. People enter into the world of NFTs for culture, right? So that means they're entering the world because they want to make friends, they want to have connections, they want to be part of community. Owning an NFT isn't specifically like something that you would just sort of trade on. Some do. But it is an icon that means something to you. For instance, why do you buy a Birkin bag? Or why do you buy a Rolex watch? You don't buy a Rolex watch to tell your time, nor would you buy a Birkin bag to put stuff in it. You're actually buying them to be part of the community. You're buying them for a utility that is part of your identity and part of those virtual network effects. And how we onboard people, in my view, isn't just about making it easier. There was this argument, oh, let's, the Web 2.5 argument, let's just bring everyone in and make it sort of very easy and they don't know what they're doing. But we disagree with that, actually. We think the successful onboarding from Web 2 to Web 3 must mean that the person is educated in a financial literate sense, right? So Web 1 created information democracy. Everyone had theoretically same access to information, and it removed the information arbitrage. But what's missing is financial knowledge, right? We all have a bank account, but how many people know anything about investing? So only 1 or 2 or 3% of the world actually are financially literate. But if you enter Web 3, the fully Web3 person is someone who is becoming much more financially literate, especially when you think about our children. Our children can learn algebra. They can study math. Why don't they learn about economics? Why don't they learn about financial systems at that same age? What would their world look like when by the time they might go to college, they actually have financial knowledge as a whole? So that is the onboarding process. So it's education. So the friction isn't a technology friction. The friction is an awareness friction, a education friction, and we think we need to solve it. Just to close, the reason why we like gaming is because gaming is one of the best ways in which you can explain a story through this mechanism. Because think about all the games you play. You go through a tutorial. It takes you maybe half an hour to learn it, and then you know everything about it. We think gaming can do the same thing for financial literacy in Web 3.
That's interesting. Yeah, because gaming, I mean, we gamify things. I have an Apple Watch on. It clearly has an impact. But I do wonder, I mean, there's deeper, beyond the issue of education, it seems like the other side of the problem is also there are legitimately scams within the NFT system.
Yep.
There are NFTs that we really shouldn't be buying. There are NFTs that have lost value very quickly, even though they aren't necessarily scams. Is there a solution to that? Are we just saying that those should exist regardless?
So, I mean, I think the one thing is that you're now in a capitalist framework, right? And so when you're existing in a capitalist framework, you have to have all the dimensions of capitalism come into play, which is in some ways the good and the bad. One of the rejections that we see a lot of people have, particularly in America, for instance, around things like NFTs, is not, we think, a rejection specifically on crypto as it were, but rather what it represents, which is a kind of digital capitalism. There's a recent sort of study that showed that Americans under the age of 30 are actually more pro-socialist than capitalist in America, which would have been quite unheard of. But that actually says something about the state of the world. In contrast, when you go to Asia, when you go to Hong Kong or Japan even, or Southeast Asia, even though there's inequity, the actual interest in capitalism and property rights is very high. And therefore, the adoption of NFTs, for instance, in Asia, Korean, Japanese, Southeast Asian game companies are all like, let's do NFTs. They're all in on Web3. The government has a very pro stance on Web3. Japan's prime minister said Web3 and the metaverse is a national agenda of the future of the company. Then you go to the US, for instance, you see a different perspective, which we think is a political perspective because of the fact that a lot of young people, capitalism hasn't worked for them. But of course, it is research and study as well. Like, if you're just thinking that you're going in, it's like you don't buy a car that doesn't work, right? Because you have to study it. So, like, if you want to purchase an NFT, you have to study the community. You have to talk to people. You have to research it in the same way. Also, we don't believe that every NFT needs to be valuable. Most of the NFTs out there are going to be utility NFTs, kind of like what you do with forks and knives or other things in the real world will have similar equivalents in the digital world. It's just that it started off in the art world, and that gave it that flavor. But we don't think that's necessarily the future. But it's going to be $1 trillion space because of capital formation.
Yeah, and this is going to be a continuing debate
as it
forms as well. I want to take a step back as well and ask you, You are not a big fan of the big tech companies. You believe that they've taken up way too much of the data. I am curious what your thoughts are on Blue Sky, which is backed by Jack Dorsey, and you are on Twitter yourself, and it's the Twitter competitor, and they are decentralized. I don't know if you're on it, but I'm just curious of what your thoughts are.
Well, first of all, in general, we like the fact that there's more choices, right? And that's one of the reasons we made so many investments also in different layer 1, layer 2s. Because we don't think there's going to be one blockchain that will win it all. In fact, we want it to be as decentralized as possible. So decentralization just doesn't mean that your applications are decentralized. Decentralization also means that you have different platforms to be on. So the way that we look at platforms, whether it's in a Web 2 or Web 3 sense, is almost like a nation. Like there is a culture. Even in Twitter, there is a certain kind of culture. In Discord, there's a certain kind of culture. And so all these new social media platforms that are emerging out there, including the one that you're talking about Jack Dorsey, have a different flavor with a different type of culture. In his case, a decentralized, maybe a more liberalist frame set, and designed around that concept. So the people who care about that will go there. The problem is that in Web 2, you were unable to make it sustainable because users in a rental concept, a non-ownership concept, are worth literally cents on the dollar. Right? We're only worth advertising. And the advertising is literally how much is your click worth, like almost nothing. But in a framework of digital property rights, actually you're worth something more than that, because the same way that you're not going to pay for your house for what it's rent, you can give forward value. You can invest in it. You can do long-term things with it. And so that means that now you can have micro-communities. That's how NFTs are represented. That could be very large enterprises, but really only maybe even just have tens of thousands of customers. And that's really the power of Web3. And so we think a much more diverse ecosystem will grow. Imagine if the restaurant industry in the world was only based on, the lowest common denominator and the sort of best efficiency. We'd all be eating fast food, right?
Yeah.
But instead, we're more than happy to pay premiums for nice restaurants that may only have thousands of customers, and that works just fine. And that's not possible with Web3. The community of, for instance, Cool Cats or Bored Apes or Mochaverse, for instance, really we're only talking about, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of users. In a Web 2 construct, you can make no money. But in a Web 3 construct, because each user actually has the value of capital is worth thousands or tens of thousands of dollars potentially, you actually have much more potential. You're serving a much sort of specific customer base, and this idea of serving your 1,000 true fans and giving them really what they want and giving them the value that they want, that they're willing to pay for, is the promise of Web 3.
Interesting. I am curious, as we're talking about kind of building for utility and as we're talking about regaining trust, you do not deal in the exchange world. You don't deal with basically like crypto as a financial instrument. You look at it more as the utility-based level. But it is fair to say that FTX and those blowups have impacted overall. Right, they're very tied in the end. That has impacted the way that your portfolio is operating. And so as you're looking at, and we spoke of this earlier, you have 400 plus companies. As you're looking out into that ecosystem, what is happening there, right? Are they taking less money? How are they being impacted by this moment?
People describe this as a crypto bear, but honestly speaking, if you look at Bitcoin at around $28,000, Ethereum at around $1,700, $1,800, that's not very bearish in comparison to where crypto was in 2018, right? Where Bitcoin was much lower and all that kind of stuff. The market definitely was clearly affected by the likes of FTX and Terra and so on, and unfortunately there are bad actors in the space. But that doesn't change the fact that you need to still have digital sovereignty and ownership of your data. One thing that's also important to reflect here is that the opportunity from our perspective doesn't come from the pure financial side in terms of exchanges. They are tools. Like banks are tools. Exchanges are tools that help an economy flourish. But you don't go to a bank because you love being in a bank. What do you love to do? You love to do things of culture, right? For instance, you love things that mean something to you as an identity. Why do you buy clothes? Why do you spend time buying clothes? If you're only buying clothes for utility, we'd all be wearing black clothes, for instance, right? Or if you're only buying shoes for utility, we'd only be buying one type of shoe, the one that was most, let's call it efficient or something, or most cheap. But we don't do that because they're all part of our identity, self-expression. Culture is the predominant economic activity in every successful economy. And therefore, from an economic sense, we think the same is going to be true in Web3. Gaming last year was $100 billion, it's a $200 billion industry, but $100 billion was spent on virtual items, or they're spending it on skins. Everything they were spending on was decorative. It was to make themselves look cool, it was part of this identity, but they were all rental goods. So really what Web3 does is just transfer that over. So we think the future is crypto culture.
Right.
And Web3 is essentially, and NFTs represent that.
So we've got very little time left, so I'm going to give you a very quick update game.
Yes.
Your fund, Reuters reported that you guys were raising a fund. You previously said it was going to be 1 to 2 billion. They reported that it was probably coming down to 800 million. You said that we would have some update on it. You would be fundraising in Q1. What is the size of that fund now?
So the fund goal is still $1 billion, right? So that hasn't changed. We always said between 1 to 2. I don't know where that story came. Someone just decided to say something, who knows. We do have a venture fund, which is already actively deploying. But most of our investments, which is where our, sort of the core of our billions of dollars of assets are lying on, is basically invested through balance sheet. And that's basically how Animoca Brands originally invested in the early companies and continues to invest in today.
And sorry, you said the goal is still 1 billion?
That's right.
So the in
It
between
hasn't raised it yet. That's
it
right.
hasn't raised yet.
That's
Okay.
right, yeah.
You were in the fundraising process, though.
We are. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we are out of time. But thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you so
here.
much.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.